Coming up after the next break, Frank Gaffney joins me to talk about today's events in Egypt. But before that, I do so with Tom Cotton, Congressman from Arkansas's 4th Congressional District, member of the House Armed Services Committee. Congressman Cotton, welcome back. A terrible event in Egypt today. The massacre of more than 50 people protesting. We still don't know if it was an assault on the Egyptian military which triggered it. But what's your reaction to this news, and what do you wish the Obama administration were doing right now?
Good evening, Hugh. It's great to be with you. Yes, the deaths in Egypt are deeply regrettable. You're right that it's unclear what sparked it, so I shouldn't come further on that. But I think it's clear what the Obama administration needs to do at this point. It needs to use the influence it has, the military leadership, to say that whatever has happened to this point, we need to respect the rights of all Egyptians moving forward. We need to have a genuine, pluralistic negotiations ahead of us that will lead to true reforms that will have not just a democratic election, but respect rights of religion and sexual equality and civic equality, and that if they don't take those reforms, then they'll be dooming themselves to the own failures that Mubarak encountered 2 years ago and that the Morsi government encountered with the Egyptian people over the last few months.
Now, Tom Cotton, I want to go back to your experience as a soldier in Iraq and the idea that has formed in some people's minds that Arab countries are incapable of democracy. In fact, that's not true. We got one up and running in Iraq. We bolted on them. I don't know how long it's going to endure, but it is possible for Arab countries to do this, isn't it?
That's true, Hugh. It's possible not just for Arab countries, but for Muslim countries. There are examples of those around the world and in history. But what we need to remember is our goal is not just a democratic government in Egypt or any other country, but a constitutional democratic government. And that was truly one of the failings of the Morsi government. He was elected, albeit there were a lot of irregularities in those elections, but his government did not respect basic constitutional forms, such as a separated powers in the government, an independent judiciary and prosecutor, rights of freedom of speech, freedom of religion, civic equality, and so forth. And without that respect for the natural rights of every man and woman in Egypt or any other country for that matter, you can't expect to have stable, long-run government, whether it's democracy or whether it's an authoritarian government.
Do you think, it's really unprecedented for a nation's military to shoot and kill 50 of its own people. It just doesn't happen. Since Tiananmen Square, and you go back to the Brits in 1919 in India, it is not something we associate with regimes that can quickly make a transition to a liberal regime. Is there reason to hope for a different result in Egypt, Tom Cotton?
Well, traditionally, the Egyptian military is among the most Western-oriented and reform-minded institutions in the country. They performed some stabilizing functions in 2011, right after the Mubarak regime fell. But they oftentimes propped up the Mubarak regime and benefited from the corruption of that regime themselves. So there are ambivalent signals, I would say, in the Egyptian military's history about whether we can count on it to have the kind of open, pluralist negotiations that brings all interested parties in Egypt to the table to try to reach that kind of constitutional democratic future that we're all like to see for the country.
And Congressman Cotton, I've been searching for information on what's actually happening there, and once in a while we'll get a shot from high above Tahrir Square, and there'll be a tweet here and a tweet there. What does a member of Congress do? How are you figuring out what's going on in Egypt?
Well, here we've been in our congressional districts over the last week for the 4th of July holiday period. So we're just back in Washington this week. As a member of the Foreign Affairs Committee, I do expect I will be having some things later this week. And then, of course, you can always engage in conversations with executive branch officials. I also like to rely on former administration officials who have deep expertise and knowledge, oftentimes experience on the ground. But frankly, I think the best thing you can do is also study carefully. You know how good, for instance, Lawrence Wright's book, The Looming Tower, is. It's very hard to understand not only Egypt, but the Muslim Brotherhood more broadly without having read that book. So I use a variety of open source material like Twitter and like websites, but also relationships with the staff that we have on the Hill and also administration and former administration staff.
Good luck in continuing that. I said armed Services. I meant Foreign Affairs. Thank you, Tom Cotton, Congressman. We'll check in with you next week. Don't go anywhere, America. Frank Gaffney coming right back after the break from Washington, D.C. Very few people have done as much work, as much research, as much thinking about the Muslim Brotherhood. And Tom Cotton just mentioned the looming tower. I have that linked over at HughHewitt.com. If you haven't read it, go and get it now, because that really does lay out exactly who it is leading the counter revolution in Egypt tonight, and with this massive crowd in Tahrir Square. Chapter 1 ain't even done, much less Chapter 2 begun. Stay with us. It's the Hugh Hewitt Show.